Members, good morning. It's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call to order the meeting of the Bills Committee on Tobacco Control Legislation Amendment Bill 2025. This is our 7th meeting. I'd like to first remind members that this meeting is scheduled to last for 3 hours and 45 minutes. Depending on the progress of the meeting, I may arrange for a 10-minute break in the middle of the meeting. Please take note of this arrangement. I'll first ask the clerk to invite the government representatives to join us.
OK，唔該。好，咁如果秘書長
Deputy Secretary, if you and your team is ready, well, please walk us through the paper. There's a list of follow-up actions arising from the discussion at the meeting on the 30th of June. That's CB bracket 31075/2025 bracket 01. There's also an administration's response to issues raised at the meeting on the 30th of June. That's LC paper number CB bracket 31075/2025 bracket 02. Deputy Secretary, please briefly walk us through this response. Thank you. Good morning. We'll carry on with the discussion today. We were talking about flavored cigarettes. Last week, we issued a paper. It is in response to issues raised by members in the last meeting. It's about the ban on specified additives for additives that naturally occur in tobacco products. How should we deal with them? We've come up with a document, and it is set out clearly in the annex of this paper about the ban of specified additives in Hong Kong, and we made a comparison of our ban with that in Canada. I'd like to point out here that the list of banned specified additives is nearly the same with that in Canada. For menthol cigarettes, we're going to cover that in the next stage. The ban in Canada has been in effect for some 10 years, and there are many smokers in Canada that comply with the rules. So I don't see how, after we impose the ban, that we will not have any smokers in Hong Kong. Well, we've explained in the paper how we're going to differentiate the specified additives as well as substances that naturally occur in tobacco products. I'll ask Dr. Fong to supplement afterwards. Paragraph 4 mentions that there is a schedule. There are 2 types of additives covered in the schedule. That's under Group 3, guarana and ammonia. On our list, we have covered these 2 substances, but they're not covered in the Canadian list. For ammonia as well, it's on our list, but not on the one in Canada. I'd like to explain a little bit here. These 2 substances are not covered under the ban in Canada. However, this is covered in the Fragrant Substances Association. So you can see that our list is consistent with that in Canada. I will invite Dr. Fong to elaborate. Dr. Fong, please. For substances that naturally occur in tobacco products, well, there have been studies over the past few decades on tobacco products. So the chemical substances, well, there have been studies on these substances in tobacco and tobacco products. In future, we will ban the specified additives in tobacco products. The way we're going to deal with it is we'll look at whether the ingredients naturally occur in the tobacco products. There are tests where we can identify these products. We'll look at the composition of the ingredients. And we will see if there are any ingredients naturally occur in the tobacco products, if they are added in the manufacturing process. The composition may be very high. There will be tests that allow us to identify. For example, there could be isotopic tests that help us identify the chemical substances which are added artificially into the tobacco products. We will compare tobacco products with a rolled tobacco, and again, we can, through lab tests, of various companies, carry out the testing. And through the comparison, we can identify whether there are any artificial additives in tobacco products. So there are ways to do it. The administration has briefly walked us through its response. I will now open the floor for questions. 3 members have asked to speak. I'll give each member 4 minutes, including questions and answers. Ms. Lillian Kwok, please. Thank you, Chairman. Additives that are artificially added to tobacco products may see very high composition. Well, do you have the relevant figures? How do you draw the line? Say, for example, if it goes up by a certain level, it will be considered as specified additives. Do you have the relevant statistics? Dr. Fong? It really depends on individual additives. I've raised an example before. Say, for example, in some tobacco products, there might be menthol-related substances. But pure menthol substances should be at a very low level. But if it is added artificially into the products, it may be 100 times higher in terms of its composition. For natural substances that occur naturally in tobacco, we'll have to refer to the relevant literature to see what the composition should be. To ensure what kind of substances are included in a tobacco product, we'll ask the tobacco makers to disclose the relevant information. We have made reference to practices in over 60 countries. We've also referred to practices in countries that have banned flavored cigarettes. In those countries, before tobacco makers roll out any products in the market, they'll have to disclose the composition of the products. And this will facilitate any comparison or testing that need to be carried out. Yes, Ms. Kwok? Just a comment. We have to be clear about all these statistics if we are to enforce the law. We cannot define what are considered as natural ingredients and what are considered as chemical substances. There might be controversies in future when the law needs to be enforced, when the government goes a step further as to including the percentage of additives that are allowed to exist in tobacco products. There are fruit extracts. The paper rolling the tobacco products could be a natural substance. It could be made of plants. Well, we're looking at flavored cigarettes here. And you mentioned about the laws in Canada. I see that there are some exemptions under the ban. For example, there might be substances that are generated in the process of manufacturing. There could also be ingredients that naturally occur in tobacco. Will you come up with clearer guidelines as to define these substances? Deputy Secretary. Well, on the scientific aspect, I'll defer to Dr. Fong, but on the minimum level of additives allowed in tobacco products, well, there are many substances in tobacco products, and there are different levels of natural ingredients or substances in tobacco products. If we set hard figures in terms of setting out the amount of ingredients or substances allowed in tobacco products, it will be very difficult, and I don't see such practice exist in other countries. Well, the member mentioned that there are some exemptions under the Canadian ban. Well, as you can see on our list, there are also exempted substances, and the exempted substances on our list are consistent with those in the Canadian list. I'll ask Dr. Fong to tell you about the minimal level of natural substances allowed. Well, in other countries, there isn't a minimum level of substances allowed. This is because the purpose of setting this kind of list is to ban specified additives. If they meet the requirements of specified additives, they should not be added to tobacco products. Also, in manufacturing tobacco products, we can add over 600 types of additives to tobacco products. Therefore, we won't set a minimum level of substances allowed in tobacco products. As long as these additives are added to tobacco products to enhance their appeal, they should not be allowed to be added. Now, on the extracts used in producing the paper wrapping tobacco products, they may be fiber, but they're mostly not fruit extracts. They are made of, for example, wooden materials. Next, Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you. I thank the administration's response. According to the administration, this Schedule 10 is modeled on the Canadian list. And so I looked at the laws in Canada. It's called Tobacco and Vaping Products Act. It's still in effect. Now, I have a couple of questions. I'm looking at our Schedule 10. Some of the parts are copied from the Canadian list. To give you an example, 1B of Schedule 10. It covers certain types of additives identified and recognized as safe flavoring substances by Flavored and Extract Manufacturing Association. The abbreviation is FEMA. For Schedule 1 of the Canadian Act, there's a list called GRAS substances. GRA 3 to GRA 29 are included. and GRA-related substances. Well, we don't have these substances included on our list. We only cover additives named by the association. But on the Canadian list, we have GRA3 to GRA29. So how come we're not covering those parts on our list?
司長唔該。
So it's the table. Secretary, Dr. Feng Ying will take the question. In our table, FEMA's list refers to substances for adding flavors. Chairman, we want to be prudent. I have read through Schedule 10 and I have compared Schedule 10 here with the Act in Canada. I see many discrepancies. So I hope for my following questions, I can get a written reply from the government. I was saying GRAS 3 to 29. If we are saying this list from Canada is the same as what we have in our schedule, I'm fine, but I would like a written confirmation. Now, in the Canadian Act Schedule 1, you have a distinction between Column 1 and Column 2. Column 2 in the Canadian Act sets out the exceptions. Say when you make cigars, some additives are allowed. So exceptions have been carved, and those can be found in Column 2 of the Canadian Act. For our Schedule 10, where we cover conventional smoking products which cover cigars, we do not carve out exemptions for the additives used in the making of cigars. So my question is why? Why this discrepancy? Dr. Feng or Dr. Feng, please. There are some minor differences between our legal system and that of Canada. As the WHO has argued, we should adopt a uniform approach to the regulation of tobacco, which shouldn't be distinguishing between different kinds of tobacco product. Differentiation may lead to legal loopholes. To give you an example, in Canada, Phase 1 regulation only covered light cigars or small cigars. And then the tobacco makers there enlarged their little cigars. That's why in Phase 2, Canada tightened their regulation. The act we're looking at is a federal law in Canada. But then at the provincial level, there are provincial laws. And the provincial laws vary from one province to the next. In 4 provinces, all tobacco products are covered. So in terms of what we cover, the situation varies from one place to the next. I still have further questions, Chairman. Can I ask a further question? Yes, please go ahead. In a moment, Mr. Peter Xu will have something to say, so I will not preempt him. Now, let's look at Schedule 10, 2A, 2AB. In Schedule 1, in the Canadian Act, they set out all the prohibitions. But for us, Schedule 10,
that they are not any of the 跟住咧佢就講 A 啦 ，A 就
and then we come to A, additives commonly associated with health benefits, including. And then B, additives commonly associated with alleged additives, including. Canada took a different approach to drafting. What we are doing here is a catch-all approach. So we say we include everything that comes with or associated with health benefits. So we're saying we have in mind a list longer than what we see in A1 through 7 and B1 through 4. In Canada, it's more clear-cut. They simply say what is not allowed. Whereas what we have here is we take an umbrella approach. So why draft our bill this way? So this is about Schedule 10. Deputy Secretary, you have the floor. We want to achieve greater clarity in drafting. Mr. Rincon brought up the Tobacco and Vaping Act in Canada. The Canadian Act is more ambiguous. You cannot tell the different kinds of substances. Our goal is to prevent tobacco makers from making tobacco more attractive. Some tobacco makers may add substances with health benefits to make the tobacco products more attractive. That's why, in our drafting, we adopt phrases such as additives commonly associated with health benefits, and also additives associated with stimulating or invigorating properties. That's why we are taking this approach. We want greater clarity on why we put certain substances in our schedule. Next, Mr. Peter Xu. I think there's a letter from the Hong Kong Tobacco Trade Association. That letter has been circulated among members. The Tobacco Trade Association represents law-abiding tobacco businesses. That covers 90% of the tobacco businesses, so they are very representative. So the gist of the letter is broadly the same as what I said last time. If we follow the schedule as it is drafted now, the tobacco businesses worry that all tobacco products, not just flavored tobacco products, will be taken off the shelf right away. Now, there are examples set out in the letter from this coalition on tobacco affairs. So have we put this letter online for others to see? I think we have. The letter is online. We want transparency. Tobacco businesses are key stakeholders in the tobacco control effort, so we want people to see the letter. The government cited the example of Canada. As I said last time, there's little to argue if we follow everything that Canada has done. They can do it, we can do it. But then we have also modeled our law on the practice of other places. Is this true? A question for the Deputy Secretary, Mr. Eddie Lee. So, this submission from the Coalition on Tobacco Affairs has covered the key points raised at the last meeting. So, can the Deputy Secretary tell us, can you address the concerns on how we draw the line between conventional tobacco and flavored tobacco? Thank you. As Mr. Peter Xu rightly said, we modeled our bill mostly on the Canadian Act. The law has taken effect in Canada for more than a decade, and they still have compliant tobacco products on the market. So it wouldn't make sense to say that Hong Kong will see no tobacco products on offer. That's why we set out the comparison in a table in the reply we provided today. In some cases, we are more lax than the Canadian approach. Take menthol as an example. We take a phased approach. Now, on other discrepancies, we can see that from the table. In most cases, we model our bill on the Canadian Act. That includes the excluded substances and other major ingredients. Mr. Peter Xu may have been informed that there are problems leading to difficulties in compliance as he talked to the industry. We're happy to listen to what Mr. Peter Xu has to say. As the Deputy Secretary said, we looked at not just the Canadian Act, we also incorporated elements from other places. That's a main reason why tobacco businesses worry about difficulties in complying with the future law. In Canada, the Act sets out exclusions. In the Canadian Act, Schedule 1 of the Act, there are additives. Item 6, for example, excluding activated charcoal, and starch. And then you have item 13, excluding those necessary to manufacture tobacco products. And then there are also elements or substances naturally present in tobacco making. Those exclusions are spelled out in the Canadian Act. Why don't we have them in the bill, Deputy Secretary? We have read through the Canadian Act in detail. And this has to do with the point raised by Mr. Rincon. Our drafting seeks to ensure greater clarity over the purposes of those additives. In Schedule 10 here, there are substances associated with stimulating or invigorating properties and those associated with health benefits. In our implementation of the future ordinance, we will also implement exclusions such as mineral nutrients. We will exclude something that Mr. Peter Xu just mentioned, meaning minerals necessary to the manufacturing of tobacco products. So in our operation, we will follow the Canadian exclusions. So I hope that puts Mr. Peter Xu's mind at ease. So there will be exclusions on our side. Chairman, I will press the button to speak for next time. Mr. Paul Tse. Thank you, Chairman. Let's leave aside the unfamiliar terms and figures. I want to speak from common sense. So I thank the government for telling us about the Canadian position. It seems that the Canadian approach is the only example. They are progressive on this point. Deputy Secretary. The Canadian ban has been in place for 15 years. So they are in a leading position. The law has been in place there for a long time. And we can see the effect. As we said in the paper, we looked at the Canadian approach and we also talked to the Canadian authorities. Tobacco businesses in Canada can offer products that comply with the law there, so things work well. And we have also looked at the Canadian smoking prevalence over the past decade or so. Smoking prevalence has been in decline in Canada with those bans on flavored tobacco products. In 2010, smoking prevalence was 17% in Canada, and then the ban took effect. In 2021, smoking prevalence was just above 10%. So that's a good example for us to follow. The World Health Organization has also cited Canada as an example of best practice in tobacco control in terms of flavored tobacco products. That's why we are modeling our bill on a successful example. And Canada's situation is similar to our position. So that's a detailed explanation. Now, I'm looking at paragraph 3. All tobacco businesses managed to comply with the law. In individual cases, warning letters were issued and then the businesses complied with the law. So, do we have any examples of prosecution or case precedents, any examples of defense raised? We don't have such examples. Is that the case? Now, with warning letters, I see that as a soft approach. So, both sides can talk. So prosecution does not happen the moment a breach is found. So is this the case? Now, I want to digress a bit. Maybe I just want to get the thoughts of the government. Canadian smoking prevalence fell from 17 to 10%. Have we also compiled the stats on the growth of drug usage? Canada, in particular, some provinces are leading the trend. They have drug centers for people to choose. People can use those, what we see as dangerous drugs, freely, and they can be in possession of drugs freely. So people have more powerful drugs on offer, so they don't bother with cigarettes. So have we looked at how Canada deals with those harmful substances?
3 questions, Deputy Secretary. I thank Mr. Paul J for the comments. I think Mr. J mostly wants to look at the differentiation between the situations in Hong Kong and Canada. Well, I cannot speak on behalf of the Canadian authority, but from what we understand, we haven't seen any major problems in the Canadian practice. We also do not see any prosecution figures from the report. I think that shows that it is not hard for people to comply with the law. That's why it has been enough for the Canadian authority to simply issue warning letters instead of initiating prosecution. In terms of law enforcement, again, I cannot speak on behalf of the Canadian authority. Well, how about us? How are we going to deal with the situation in future? Well, we will take actions in accordance with the law. Say tobacco makers have any misunderstanding, we will of course write to them to explain the law. Say for example, if a type of drug needs to comply with the requirements, the relevant pharmaceutical companies can make inquiries. Now, on the last point about drugs, practices at different places vary. Over the past 20 years, we have been performing well in terms of our anti-tobacco policy. We have also been doing well in combating drugs. Well, our framework is different from that of Canada. We have rolled out the 10 anti-tobacco measures, and this is part of our anti-tobacco policy. We have to tread carefully. If we make close association between tobacco control and drug control, well, it would be misleading because in nature they are different, and the difference applies to different places in the world. Next, Ms. Doreen Kong. One of the banned specified additives under Schedule 10 is those that facilitate the uptake of nicotine, including ammonia. However, this is not included in the Canadian list. Well, how come we're more ahead compared to Canada? Why are you covering this substance in the schedule? Also, I'd like to see clarification on this. The administration said a number of times that the practice in Canada has been successful for many years. However, over the past few years, the Canadian government did a number of legislative review on this act. And this year, they're doing the third review. The first review took place in 2022, the second in 2024, and the third in 2025. I looked at the 3 legislative reviews, and they look at whether Schedule 1 of their act is an overkill. For example, according to them, Schedule 1 covers too broad a scope. For example, through innovative technologies, they can come up with substances that are not harmful to our bodies. However, the Schedule 1 is too broad, according to their review. Well, since our Schedule 10 is modeled on the Canadian list, I want to know if the administration has studied carefully at least the 2 legislative reviews that took place in Canada. I don't want to simply copy the old stuff from other countries. If we want to be ahead, then we have to make reference to the latest legislative reviews as well. Have you looked at the latest legislative reviews, Deputy Secretary? On the point about ammonia, as mentioned in my opening remark, ammonia is not banned in Canada, but we are proposing a ban on this substance. However, ammonia is a banned additive of the Flavor and Extract Manufacturers Association. Indeed, ammonia is banned in Canada as well. Chemically speaking, ammonia can facilitate the uptake of nicotine of human bodies. And so ammonia can make tobacco products more addictive. That's why around the world, including Canada, there's a ban on ammonia. Well, as to whether the list will stifle the development of innovative technologies, well, I think we have to think about this carefully. Say, for example, tobacco makers have come up with some innovative technologies. Well, it's hard for us to make a conclusion or judgment now, but we have to look at whether these innovative technologies would enhance the appeal of tobacco products, especially to young people, and thus increase the smoking prevalence in Hong Kong. So we have to be careful. We cannot be too lenient. Now, on the legislative reviews that took place in Canada, we have already looked at the latest legislative review, and true, there's been some amendments. However, it's been so many years now since the Canadian authority wrote out this act, and there's been a comprehensive list under the Canadian Act. Well, in future, we can also, based on international trend as well as advice given by the WHO, amend our schedule. Mr. Peter Xu. Deputy Secretary said over the past decade, the smoking rate in Canada dropped from 17 to 10%. This is very encouraging. And the administration also said tobacco control is different from combating drugs. Well, I agree. However, in Canada, people can consume e-cigarettes. Well, can e-cigarettes be consumed in Canada? Well, what is the situation with e-cigarettes in Canada? Well, I'll ask Dr. Feng to reply. Yes, you can have e-cigarettes in Canada. Well, we're banning heated tobacco products as well as e-cigarettes, so there are no other options. According to the administration, the smoking rate in Canada have dropped significantly. Well, as far as I understand, in Canada, even for menthol-flavored e-cigarettes, they are allowed. Well, do you have statistics which show that e-cigarette consumers have shifted to another market? Well, after the ban on the specified additives in Canada, there's been progress in terms of encouraging smoking cessation in Canada. Well, Dr. Fong can tell you how the ban can help people quit smoking in Canada. Dr. Fong, there are studies which show that after the Canadian authority imposed the ban, the smoking prevalence has dropped. Around the world, studies focus on menthol cigarettes. So we see that in Canada, after the ban, there's an increase of 8% of those smoking cigarettes compared to those smoking menthol cigarettes. Chairman, my question is, after people have quit conventional smoking products, they may shift to e-cigarettes. This is because menthol e-cigarettes are allowed in Canada. Dr. Fong? Well, around the world, statistics show that as long as e-cigarettes are not banned, there would be an increase in terms of the usage rate of e-cigarettes. Same in Canada. Is it because of a ban of flavored cigarettes, which leads to an increase of the consumption of e-cigarettes? Well, we don't have the relevant statistics that prove it. Yes, Mr. Stu? Well, menthol cigarettes were banned, and then we see a drop in the smoking rate, and people shifted to e-cigarettes. Dr. Fong confirmed that there was an increase in terms of the consumption of e-cigarettes. So how come we say that there is no relationship between the two? In future, after the passage of the bill, will people turn to the illicit cigarette market? And Custom Excise Department will have a lot of work to do. Mr. Poche? Well, I think we're all in the same position in terms of tobacco control. It's just that we have different views on the priority. Members have views on the Canadian example. Some say that the act is outdated, so we should not follow the practice. Others say that we are going after an overkill. And you said that the smoking rate dropped, but at the same time there are more people consuming e-cigarettes. Well, I think this is rather frustrating. It's not that we're trying to obstruct the passage of the bill. It's just that we want to be more stringent. We are acting as the red team to see whether there are any blind spots so that we don't follow the bad practices. What is ironic is that we're supposed to be the freest city in our country, but with this bill we may become the city with the least freedom. And then you're taking things out of context when you look at the Canadian practice. You look at the Tobacco and Vaping Act and you say that they're doing very well in terms of tobacco control, but they're allowing people to take drugs freely. Well, I don't want to digress too much here. I just want to point out paragraph 5 of your paper about your approach. You say that after the passage of the bill, you'll ask people to submit the certificate of compliance, and you will set out the details in the subsidiary legislations. You'll ask tobacco makers and tobacco traders to fully disclose the composition of tobacco products. You also said that it's been over half a century that there are talks about the composition of tobacco products. Well, if you already have such information for so many years, how come you do not come up with a table first? Then you can enact the law. You put the burden on proof on tobacco makers and suppliers because you're going to ask them to submit certificates of compliance. Are you going to ask tobacco traders to take oath and you're simply putting all the responsibilities on them? Will they be held criminally liable, say for example, if false declaration is made and if they violate the trade description ordinance? So you are setting new traps for tobacco traders. Is that your legislative intent? Have you thought about the consequences that tobacco traders may face? Well, it's been more than half a century, but you did not enforce the law previously. So I want to know if you are being rigorous enough. Just now the administration said it would take actions in accordance with the law. I'm quite concerned about this. This is because a lot of things are not dealt with under the common law approach. Sometimes things are dealt with out of discretion. Other times, because of freedom and because of the name of democracy, we try to be lenient. And over the past 10 years or so, the Canadian authority has been issuing warning letters. They've been adopting a rather soft approach. Well, but the doctor said it does not have any relevant information or statistics. And you simply emphasize that the smoking rate in Canada has dropped to 10%. Well, there was zero prosecution in Canada. And how did Canada manage to do that? It could be because they refrain from instigating prosecution. What I want to say is that you're shifting the responsibility to tobacco traders and tobacco makers. Well, we are enjoying less and less freedom in Hong Kong, and we may have fewer options on tobacco products in future. So I hope that you're not narrowing the freedom we have in Hong Kong by passing this bill.
Deputy Secretary, I can see where Mr. Te is coming from. He supports the policy of tobacco control. But on execution, Mr. Te wants to share more thoughts. We are grateful for that. But do let me clarify something. Mr. Te used the word crude in our thinking. We beg to differ. In drafting our bill, we have looked at the approach in other jurisdictions. We have also taken into account Hong Kong's situation. Mr. Te also brought up priorities. We're not trying to put this regime in place overnight. Some legislative members drew our attention to illicit cigarettes. That's why we will wait till the duty stamp system and tougher measures for illicit cigarettes. We want those measures to be in place before we come to the ban on flavored cigarettes. So we do take a rigorous approach to our work, and we have taken on board members' views. Mr. Te also brought up freedom. Again, we disagree. We want to protect public health. That's a shared goal. We had public consultations in the past. People wanted to see the smoking prevalence to fall further. What we're doing is for public health. Making this an issue about freedom is inconsistent with what we have in mind. Our smoking prevalence is on the low side. Other places see our smoking prevalence as a success. It's a sign of how advanced we are in civic standards here. Now, in Canada, there are no prosecution figures. That shows the flavored cigarettes regime is not causing tobacco makers there any problem. Since the system works well in Canada, we do not see any enforcement or prosecution problems for Hong Kong. And can you also talk about the certificate of compliance? Now, on how the certificate will work, I will invite Dr. Feng Ying to talk about that further. Now, on these certificates of compliance, our goal is for those tobacco products to be free of those banned additives before they come to Hong Kong. So in terms of how it works, the suppliers will have to apply to the Director of Health for a certificate of compliance before the tobacco comes here. The suppliers will have to provide details on the product and make a declaration to the effect that the tobacco products are free of those banned additives. And when the tobacco checks out, we issue the certificate of compliance. We also compile database of the certificate. The information will be accessible to the public and the downstream suppliers so that people can see those products come with the certificate. The certificates will also come with a term. What we have in mind is 2 years per certificate. And then the tobacco products are in the local market. The downstream retailers first have to ensure that they are getting their goods from lawful sources, and they will have to be aware that those products come with certificates. If needed, they can look up the information online. For suppliers supplying products to the market without a certificate, that will be an offense. As for retailers, sale of cigarette products with banned additives may be an offense, but there will be a defense, and that is, this retailer has acted in reliance on a certificate of compliance. That will be a defense. That is to ensure that the products on the market are free of banned additives. And people can tell the retailers are selling compliant product. Next, Dr. David Lam. Thank you, Chairman. There is much discussion about the bill. I want to put some questions to check that my understanding is correct. So under this new framework, first, the tobacco suppliers will have to declare that their products are free of banned additives, and then they obtain a certificate. That's the first step. And then the next step, or as part of the first step, the tobacco suppliers will have to provide details on the chemical structure of the tobacco product. And then if the government suspects that some products come with banned additives, then there's a need to establish whether there are additives. The government will have to prove there are banned additives. I wonder if this is correct. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. And then there was much discussion about the Canadian approach. I just have a comment to make. We don't have to copy Canada's approach. We don't want to be just like Canada, especially with regard to drug control. We shouldn't learn from Canada's approach to dangerous drugs. Now, I'm looking at the WHO's figures. The approach featuring additives instead of flavoring agents works better. Canada has more experience in this regard. Their system is tried and tested. So we should be following Canada's approach on this front instead of replicating other aspects in tobacco control or drug control. I wonder if this is correct. Deputy Secretary. Dr. Lam is right. We're learning from a successful model. The WHO issued a report pointing to Canada as an example of best practice. And we also agree with Dr. David Lam on conflating tobacco control with drug control. Just because a place is permissive with drug control, that's not a license for tougher control over tobacco. So we should keep tobacco control and drug control as separate matters. On the certificate of compliance for flavored cigarettes, Dr. Lam's understanding is also correct. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwok. I also have questions about the certificate of compliance. It's a new concept. And because it's new, the industry will need time to get used to it. So will the government talk to the industry? Will there be guidelines to clarify how to apply for the certificate? That's important. My next point is that say the tobacco supplier is told that something is missing in their first application. Will there be a window, a grace period for the tobacco supplier to submit the missing document? Maybe the supplier will have to arrange lab tests on their own. They will have to supply further information. How would that work? Can we have more clarity on this? So again, this is a question about the certificate. Deputy Secretary, Dr. Fong can tell us more in a moment, but I want to say a few words first. There will be a piece of subsidiary legislation on the certificate. For any new regulatory regime, we will consider taking a pilot approach first. We will see if things work before going on a full-scale implementation, just like the duty stamp system. Starting from the third quarter this year, the Customs and Excise will run a pilot. We want our stakeholders to understand the new rules so that they can comply with them, as with any regime. Next, Mr. Dennis Leung. Chairman, I'm looking at the government's reply. I think it's clear. I know there will be subsidiary legislation explaining how the certificate of compliance will work. But with food items, our regulations spell out the ingredients of the food items. That's not a novel concept. Now with tobacco products, we're adding new requirements, so there's a question mark for the tobacco industry. So I hope the government can talk to the industry to explain how things work. I think we need to make it clear to consumers what the ingredients are in the product they're buying. We don't want young people to try smoking so that we can drive down the smoking prevalence. That's our broad direction. Paragraph 6 in the paper is clear enough. We're taking an incremental approach to banning flavored cigarettes. So we first put in place the stamp duty or duty stamp system. So there's time to explain the new regime. So what can we do in terms of explaining the new regime? So I hope the government can make an effort on this front.
意見嚟。
Deputy Secretary is a comment. I thank Mr. Leung for the comment. Next, Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, Chairman. On the certificate of compliance, just now the Deputy Secretary said the details were set out in the subsidiary legislations. I have some comments. I'm looking at the EU situation. Members of the EU said in the past there were different reporting formats for tobacco makers to report information. Different operation models are adopted by different tobacco traders and makers, and trade secrets may be involved. In terms of the design of the declaration form and the certificate of compliance, I think there needs to be transparency. We have to, at the same time, respect traders' operating models and practices. Now, I want to say that I fully support tobacco control. Just now I brought up the example in Canada. I understand that the administration is modeling this bill on the Canadian Act. Well, I think it's not simply by copying another country's model that we can solve the problems we face. If we are modeling our bill on a certain act from a country, well, we have to look at it in a more holistic approach. Visitors to Canada can bring 50 sticks of cigars as well as 200 sticks of cigarettes to Canada, and this is very different from the situation in Hong Kong. And in their previous legislative review, the Canadian authorities said it is a very watertight law, but at the same time, they failed to ban online sales of tobacco products because it's hard to enforce the law. So I'm not saying that we cannot model our bill on the Canadian Act. It's just that we need a more comprehensive and objective analysis of the situation in Canada, because this would be healthier for Hong Kong. On what parts we should refer to the Canadian situation, Deputy Secretary. Now, to address the question about declaration, I understand that trade secrets or commercially sensitive information may be involved. So we'll be careful in terms of how much information we're going to ask from tobacco traders. Secondly, on the legislative reviews that took place in Canada, well, we review our laws from time to time in Hong Kong as well. So we are having this 7th meeting of the Bills Committee. Our regulatory agencies have been in talks with other regulators around the world to learn about the latest international trend as well as the advice given by the WHO. So there is a mechanism in place. Mr. Peter Xu. Thank you. Well, I believe that this meeting will end within 4 hours. So we're raising some very broad comments. I ask for your understanding, Chairman. Many people have the view that smoking is hazardous to our health. Some people wonder why we're not banning all types of tobacco products in one go. Instead, we're leaving out fruit-flavored cigarettes or menthol cigarettes. Now, let me deal with some housekeeping rules here. We have spent about an hour on issues raised in the previous meeting. However, I understand that in the meeting last week, members have quite a number of comments on flavored cigarettes, so I will allow members to speak on this topic. However, when it's about time, I'll have to go back to the clause-by-clause scrutiny of the bill. Members are welcomed to raise questions, but please focus on the issues raised in the previous meeting. I understand that members have their views on flavored cigarettes as well as cigarettes with additives. So I'll leave time for members to discuss this. Deputy Secretary, please. Now, going back to the policy discussion we had at the beginning, we've been talking about the 10 tobacco control strategies. Our strategies focus on regulating the use of tobacco products to lower the smoking prevalence in Hong Kong. Unlike dangerous drugs, we're not banning cigarettes altogether. This is not our policy intent. The global trend is that there should be discussions in place in relation to the age limit for buying cigarettes. In the consultation papers released in June, we covered this topic as well, and this is going to be a medium to long-term discussion that we're going to have. Depending on the global trend, we can have further discussions on this. At this stage, we are focusing on regulating tobacco products. Mr. Peter Xu, I think the global trend is not to ban all tobacco products. This is because people should be given the freedom to make their own choice. While we need to tell people about the harm of tobacco products, we have to respect people's freedom to make a choice. Well, Mr. Porsche also brought up the issue of freedom. Well, the general direction is that we want people to smoke less. However, according to the consultation outcomes, about half of the people in Hong Kong hold different views. I think it's mostly because they respect the freedom of people to make their own choice. Now, with the passage of the bill, there will be no more shisha in Hong Kong. In Shenzhen, there are about 20 shops in the street with bars and restaurants that provide shisha. If we are banning fruit-flavored cigarettes, we're also going to ban piped tobacco. Will that pose an impact on businesses in Hong Kong? Deputy Secretary. Shisha is considered as a conventional tobacco product. All along, we've been regulating this kind of products. In terms of selling and promoting shisha, It should be regarded as conventional tobacco products. They are under our regulation. There aren't many bars and restaurants in Hong Kong that can lawfully sell shisha. The health department has been conducting inspections on bars and restaurants, and it was found that over half of the places that sell shisha breached the regulations. Over half of these bars and restaurants allow people to smoke shisha in the outdoor area. Some of them do it indoor. So the compliance situation deserves our attention. 2 weeks ago, there was a report showing that someone got poisoned because of carbon monoxide because of smoking shisha. So we have to look at this in a serious way. Shisha is not just an entertainment product. There should be a regulatory mechanism in place to regulate this kind of tobacco products. Yes, Mr. Xu? Well, I think TACO should work hard on combating unlawful tobacco products. No members in this council, including myself, are supporting this kind of unlawful tobacco products. I'm just saying that there's a street in Shenzhen dedicated to shisha, and so I believe there will be an increasing demand for such products. I believe that about 100 or 200 bars and restaurants in Hong Kong that offer shisha, not just those with outdoor areas. You see that in Shenzhen, in order to expand their businesses, bars and restaurants are offering this type of products. So would that pose no impact on our bars and restaurants in Hong Kong? Well, I don't think that's the case. Mr. Stephen Ho. Well, I think there's a need to ensure tobacco control. I have a couple of questions for the administration. Does the government know that how many of the tobacco products currently sold in the market can comply with the law after the passage of this bill? Have you done such a survey? With the passage of the bill, some types of tobacco products may be gone from the market. I'm looking at C3365 about additives. I don't understand why vitamin A is banned as well. Well, what do vitamins taste like? Can you explain why you're including vitamins on your list? Well, there are laws in place to ban tobacco traders to promote about vitamins in tobacco products. So why are you including vitamins on your list?
你點樣預計第日
So 2 questions. First, how many certificates of compliance do we expect in the future? That's the first question. And then the second question actually has been addressed before, but maybe the Deputy Secretary can explain that once again. Now, certificates of compliance, we believe there will be many such applications. As we said earlier, the Canadian experience shows with a ban on flavored cigarettes, products with banned additives will no longer be available on the market. Still, there are compliant tobacco products on the market in Canada. So back home, we believe there will be many applications for certificates of compliance. We're talking about banning flavored cigarettes, but this regime will be put in place after other things are off the ground, such as the duty stamp system and the tougher actions against illicit cigarettes. By that time, the tobacco business will have ample time. And compliance products are already available in markets elsewhere. Now, the other question, why we include vitamins and amino acids in the schedule? Other places also ban such additives for a reason. That's to make tobacco products less attractive. Whether it's about the flavor or other chemical additives, all those additives are banned to make the tobacco product less appealing. Now, some ingredients have something to do with other substances. Take ammonia as an example. Ammonia facilitates the inhalation of nicotine, and that makes you get addicted easier. And ammonia also changes the taste. That's why other places take this comprehensive approach. I have a follow-up question. We have heard about the Canadian experience. So can we say that what can be sold in Canada now will also be able to be sold in Hong Kong? The government said they expect many applications for certificates, but there is no word on how many such products will meet the standards. If you don't have enough products, in the meantime, there will be an impact on the community. Now, on the additives, we single out ammonia and we say that will change the flavor. So we should be dealing with ammonia as a flavor-altering substance, but vitamins, we have no idea what the taste is like, what the flavor is like. I think that deviates from your original purpose. Some substances make smoking products more attractive. But the point is, tobacco businesses cannot advertise their products as healthier. With all these restrictions you're introducing, you may be making it harder for tobacco makers to come up with products. So you should be including those substances as substances you ban because they are flavor altering. A brief reply would do. We're banning substances for flavored cigarettes to make those products less appealing. So we're covering substances associated with health benefits. Now, on whether there will be a gap in Hong Kong, do we have any law on substances with health benefits or health claims? Do we have such laws? For Hong Kong's tobacco products, there will be uniform packaging requirements, and then there will be a piece of subsidiary legislation saying what you can put on the packaging. That question went unanswered. Can tobacco makers say now that they have included certain ingredients and now their products are healthy? If needed, you can press the button and you can wait for your turn because Ms. Carmen Khan is waiting to speak. Ms. Carmen Khan. Thank you, Chairman. I've been following the questions and answers. So let's look at the reply. we want to make tobacco products less appealing. We don't want the taste to disguise the harshness. We don't want non-smokers to try smoking. We also want to strengthen the incentive for smokers to quit. We all get that. The question is on how you go about the regime. You can take a positive approach, meaning you can sell your product only when the product comes with certain features. But Schedule 10 takes the other approach. It's a negative approach. It sets out what you cannot have in the product. And then Part 2 of the schedule comes with exclusions. Now we just saw the list from the Canadian Act. So for mineral nutrients and fruit extract, in the annex to the letter, can I get a clarification that the inclusion of fruit extracts and mineral nutrients is in line with the Canadian Act? Now the reply also says this: an ingredient that is naturally present in the tobacco is allowed, because that's on the exclusion list. But is that exclusion written into our bill? That's my second question. Now, I don't have a science background. We are modeling our bill on the Canadian Act. So the Act works in Canada, no prosecution has ensued. Does Canada also adopt certificates of compliance in their tobacco control regime? We want to make sure our bill will work in the future. So can the government tell us whether Canada also adopts the certificate to regulate their tobacco makers? Deputy Secretary. I first invite Dr. Feng Ying to tell us about the regulatory regime in Canada and also the elements that are naturally present in tobacco. Dr. Feng. Now, from the reports from Canada and from our discussion with our Canadian counterparts, we have learned that the Canadian government requires reporting or declarations from tobacco businesses. That's for the government there to find out what ingredients there are, and then at the import stage, spot checks are performed to find out whether banned additives are found. So the rate of breach non-compliance is roughly 1%, which is on the low side. And the Canadian government also requires immediate rectification when non-compliance is found. Or have we included elements of naturally present ingredients in the bill? Deputy Secretary. Now, as we said in the reply, we're talking about additives, something you add to the product. Schedule 8 also says that this is about something that alters the taste or smell. What is naturally present will not qualify as additives. Now, I'm asking a question because the Canadian approach is also to adopt declarations. So the approach is that we trust the declaration first and then we do spot checks. So I think that's an example that shows how the regime works. I think our discussion just clarified the point. What is naturally present is not an additive, so that's clear enough. Now, on the excluded substances, can the government elaborate on that further? And this point was also raised by Mr. Peter Shiu. what's on the Canadian exclusion list, meaning the minimal nutrients in fruit and another substance, is also on our exclusion list. And we can give thought to the members' thought. If needed, we can consider ways to spell that out with greater clarity. 3 members are waiting to speak. Now I want to manage the time. We have spent an hour and a half on the follow-up item from last time, which is on flavored cigarette. Now, on several areas such as the certificate of compliance enforcement in Canada, and also the differences between our schedule and the Canadian Act, and also contrasts between dangerous drugs and tobacco in Canada, illicit cigarettes, vaping, and whether the burden of proof will be on the tobacco businesses to prove compliance. We have had much discussion over these points, and questions have been raised over the same matters. So for Mr. Stephen Ho, Mr. Porter, and Mr. Peter Xu, I will let you ask your questions. And then we take a break. After the break, we return to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. We have already seen the same subjects coming up time and again, so we have had an ample discussion over those points. Mr. Stephen Ho, I want to follow up on my question. So, in Canada, is it also prohibited for tobacco makers to claim their products come with health benefits? Dr. Feng Ying. That question comes back to the schedule. Now we're following the guidelines of the WHO's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. We want to make tobacco products less appealing. That's why we're banning several kinds of substances. Now, does that point to shortcomings in our publicity? Now, we're talking about additives should be banned because they have to do with certain purposes. Most tobacco products in Hong Kong are imported products. Even if we ban the advertising of supposed health benefits, but we cannot ban the advertising of those health benefits that happens elsewhere. We cannot ban the advertising outside Hong Kong. So that's why there's no link between banning the advertising of health benefits and banning the substances associated with health benefits. So my question is, if we pass this bill, how much percentage-wise, or how many of those certificates are expected to be up to scratch? Now, I don't know how many kinds of tobacco products there are on the market. Maybe we now have 60 or 70, and then after the bill is passed, those products are gone. What will we do? Will there be a longer grace period? The transitional period is what I'm worried about, and people will struggle to cope. This point came up at the last meeting. So can we maybe have a clearer answer on this for the tobacco business to be aware of how this will work? So the ban on flavored cigarettes will not take immediate effect after the bill's passage. We will set a commencement date, and we will let you know when that happens. We will also have to make a piece of subsidiary legislation on the certificate of compliance. There will be ample time. Now, even when that subsidiary legislation is adopted or passed, there will be a transitional period and there will be a pilot. The transitional period will be there for the tobacco business to get ready. And in the transitional period, the existing product will remain on the market. There will be a transitional period. We do not expect major chaos in the market.
Mr. Poche. I remember I said this in the previous meeting. I mentioned about X plus N. N is the additives, and what is X? It's tobacco products that are being sold and elements that are naturally present in the tobacco products. Well, now we don't know what X is. So it's hard for us to have a full grasp of the situation. And there's no specific mention of this in the administration's paper. You said that there's been studies over the past half a century or so on these products, but still we don't know about the composition of the various substances and different types of tobacco products. So in future there might be chaos under the declaration system. So I'd like to seek the administration's clarification on this. Well, just now you said that ingredients that are naturally present in the tobacco products will be acceptable. Is there a definition for elements that are naturally present in tobacco products? Also, what are additives? Really? You said that natural ingredients can be exempted or excluded. If there could be a clearer definition on this, then it will make things clearer. Now, I'd like to go back to the point about freedom. We understand the harm of secondhand smoking. But now we're talking about additives. And you're banning even healthy substances. We're not just looking at the harm of first-hand or second-hand smoking on people. We're looking at additives that may pose harm. And you said that even those additives that may pose little harm will be banned. However, we're also looking at additives that pose very little harm on smokers. Just now, the Deputy Secretary said that we cannot make a direct comparison between dangerous drugs and cigarettes. However, it is like an art. We have to be lenient. If you're banning both cigarettes as well as dangerous drugs, then people will go to Shenzhen to take these products. You're creating tension in society. We need leniency. I'm talking about additives that will pose minimal harm to smokers. And you're banning even these additives. Just now, Mr. Peter Xu said, if you ban all these additives, then you'll have to relax the regime again. And this happened in the US because you cannot pose a rigorous ban on people. I don't see the wisdom from the administration to deal with the problem. I think we need to strike a balance. There are pros and cons to various things. How can you ensure a balance in our society? So will you please clarify what is X in the X plus N formula? And also, can you specify what kind of natural substances will be excluded? Deputy Secretary, definition of natural ingredients. Well, Mr. Poche has been talking about X plus N. I think more correctly, we should focus on what is N instead of looking at what is X plus N. We have to ensure whether a substance is an additive. So I'll ask Dr. Feng to tell you how we're going to identify or differentiate between natural substances and additives. So the approach is not to define X. Dr. Feng, please. In the process of manufacturing tobacco products, tobacco makers may add a lot of additives to the product. Say we identify a banned additive in a tobacco product. Then we'll look at whether the additive is naturally present in the tobacco product. If it is naturally present in the tobacco product, then what we have to do is to conduct an analysis on the element. We will resort to chemical means to see whether the additives are naturally present. We can look at the structure of the substance. We can do isotopic tests, for example, to see whether the element is naturally present. Second method is to look at the difference in composition. For example, if the composition exceeds the composition and natural ingredients by, say, dozens of times according to literature, then it could be a chemical additive. Thirdly, we look at hand-rolled cigarettes, and we can compare the composition of hand-rolled cigarettes with the tobacco products concerned to make sure that there are only ingredients naturally present in the tobacco products. So we can make a comparison this way. So there are ways to make the comparison. Well, I don't mean to interject, but quite a number of members are concerned about this. Is my understanding correct? Currently, conventional tobacco products that are being sold on the market, they only entail natural substances. Well, we've been talking about this since last week. Will Deputy Secretary tell us that for conventional tobacco products have been sold on the market for years, they only entail natural substances? This is to ease members' concerns. Thank you. Chairman. The conventional tobacco products sold on the market, flavors are being added to them, and they will be banned after the new regime is implemented. For some conventional tobacco products, they claim that they did not add any flavors to the products, but it may not be true. So we'll have to carry out scientific tests on those products to verify the composition in other places like in Canada. Tobacco products free of banned additives are provided on the market, so I don't see how this is not possible in Hong Kong. There will be subsidiary legislations, there will be sufficient transitional period. Stakeholders who do not understand the new regime, they may write to the Department of Health to ask for more information. Ms. Rebecca Chen. Just now, the Deputy Secretary mentioned about the certificate of compliance, and there will be a commencement date for this new system. In future, tobacco makers will have to submit certificates of compliance, and you will act as the gatekeeper by carrying out tests. However, you did not mention about the scale of this. Will the Department of Health be responsible for this? There are so many different types of tobacco products on the market. Should we simply trust that the tobacco makers will make truthful and accurate declarations and certificates of compliance? If not, you'll need a lot of manpower to do the testing. Please provide the information. Secondly, the administration said time and again that there's a ban on specified additives in other countries, and there are tobacco products free of these additives on the market, so we need not to be worried. However, we got a letter from the relevant association saying that there are certain substances that need to occur in tobacco products, for example, paper and wooden materials. However, vitamins, mineral nutrients, fruit extracts, and vegetable extracts may also exist in this kind of tipping paper. I'm referring to the wrapping paper of tobacco products. They are part of a tobacco product. If they are necessary for producing a tobacco product and there are additives in this kind of paper, will these tobacco products be able to be sold? Under the Canadian Act, products that exist in this kind of paper will not be regulated. However, this exemption is not spelled out in our bill. Say for the tipping paper or the wrapping paper or the filter consists of additives. How will you deal with it? I want to seek the administration's clarification on this. Well, before the administration speaks, I'd like to manage the time. After Mr. Peter Shiu has spoken, there will be a break, and afterwards we will carry on with the clause-by-clause scrutiny. So we will wrap up this part after Mr. Peter Shiu has spoken. Then we will go back to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. Deputy Secretary, I'll ask Dr. Feng Ying to speak about the tests. We will do sampling checks. As to how large the scale will be, it really depends on the law enforcement needs. We ask tobacco makers to disclose the composition of tobacco products in the certificate of compliance. They'll have to make a declaration. If we are to do sampling checks, it will really depend on the resources available as well as the law enforcement needs. But there are so many types of tobacco products on the market, and we do not know the scale of tests to be carried out. Will there be a dedicated department or will there be an inspection team to be responsible for this? Deputy Secretary, I understand Ms. Chan's concern. There are many types of tobacco products, but we are going to do sampling checks. We rely on tobacco suppliers to be compliant with the laws. We will do sampling checks. There are resources within the Department of Health. If necessary, we will redeploy resources. There are also government labs if need be. We will deploy resources to carry out tests. However, I want to stress that we will do sampling checks, but overall speaking, we will rely on tobacco suppliers to be compliant with the law. The responsibility will fall on tobacco makers, and this is a balance struck.
Chairman, he did not answer my questions about the rolling paper and filters, so a brief reply would do. The tobacco business felt that the bill wasn't clear enough. Now, on regulating fruit extract and mineral nutrients, we will also have exclusions, just like what you see in the Canadian Act, and if needed, we can spell that out with greater clarity. Next, the last speaker for this session, Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you. Appreciate your effort, Chairman. Let's look at Schedule 10. Let's look at specified additives. Now I'm looking at 7. Bornyl acetate para-ethyl alcohol, and all the way to 20 ethyl salicylate. So can we confirm that from items 7 to 20, they are also in the Canadian Act? So let's compare the terms. From items 7 to 20, are those also on the Canadian list? Dr. Feng Ying will walk us through. Number 7 to 20, item 7 to 20. From items 5 to 21, they have to do with tobacco products. In the Canadian Act, these substances are banned. But for menthol cigarettes, we will leave that to the next phase. These ingredients are already banned in Canada. These substances are already banned on the list from FEMA. So are you sure they are on the Canadian list? They are banned in Canada. Some in the tobacco business told me they couldn't see those substances on the list in Canada. So we can double check that later. I know we have discussed extensively the point about following Canada. Okay, in 2024 and 25, Health Canada issued a fact sheet. The gist was that banning vaping helped mitigate the harm of tobacco. So the gist was that vaping actually helped people quit, helped smokers quit. And that's a statement from Health Canada. So will our Health Bureau follow the practice of Health Canada, meaning relaxing the rules on vaping to give people an alternative? We touched on this point before. Deputy Secretary, we now have a full ban on alternative smoking products. A certain claim may arise in Canada. Someone may say that vaping helps smokers quit. But international authoritative bodies have made it clear that vaping is not helping smokers quit, and we don't have any authoritative body say that. So we're cherry picking what practice we follow. I think when I'm done with my questions, I think the point has been made clear. So the administration has its views. So we will start a break. We will pick up at 11 a.m. We will come back to the clause-by-clause scrutiny. We will pick up from page 126. It's page 126 that we will pick up the discussion. Thank you.